Hello. I don't know if this video is going to work, so it's just a sort of trial. I'm going to Fort Ward Park in Alexandria. When I put it on... Hello. I'm not sure if this is going to work. It's quite loud out. But I'm walking around Fort Ward Park in Alexandria. This is... It used to be a fort in the Civil War, and so that was in the 1860s, and this is now a public park. As you can see, some dogs playing around there. I haven't been here for several years. I don't imagine it's changed very much, unless they needed to do some maintenance. These things happen, you know? So, just wait and see if something interesting happens here. Well, I don't imagine that there would be any dog shit being a problem back during the Civil War, but you never know. Last thing you need is to slip and eat shit, as the saying goes. So, here's an old tombstone from Clara Adams. I don't know if you can see it. It says Clara Adams, W. Adams, June 2nd, 1865 to February 1st, 1952. 70 years ago. A tender aunt and a faithful friend. So she died just after the Civil War. She lived to be 35, 52, 86. That's a ripe old age, especially at the time when they didn't have any medicine to speak of back then. So here you have a sort of impromptu, it's got to be planned out, but small cemetery. There's some right here. See tombstones. There's some behind, I guess that's the VIP room there. If you can't read, it says Virginia Fitzhugh died January 18th, 1918, age 65 years. Well done, good, and faithful servant. 65. So she, my math is dismal, but let's say 47. So she would have been born in the 1850s, so she might have seen this place in action. Didn't see a whole hell of a lot of action, but there she is. So they've got a few of these little posts here telling you about the people who lived here. So that Clara Adams, who was up by that tree, Robert Adams, conveyed a quarter acre to the Falls Church School District of Fairfax County in 1898 for the purpose of educating African American children. The one-room colored school building at Seminary. This is probably about a mile or two down the road there. It was the first public schoolhouse for African Americans living in the fort and seminary community. So this is the fort. I imagine that back there where those houses are would be where the community is, or the fort. Yeah, so this was turned from a fortress, Civil War fort, into a community. Now it's just a park, as you can see, trees everywhere. They weren't there during the time of the Civil War, but it's interesting. So this sort of gated community there, the Oakland Baptist Church Private Cemetery. As you can see here, this was sort of a black community that started right at the end of the Civil War. To the 1930s when they started really developing it. as the Oakland Baptist Church. I see neither hide nor hair of. As you can see here, try to get it out of the way. It's an interesting place, to be honest with you. A lot of people, they know it's here, but they don't visit it. And not that it's any sacred pilgrimage or anything like that, but it's a piece of history lying in your own backyard. And if you do a little bit of research, it is a fascinating place. And we'll get to the more military part of this, but there is a community that obviously lived here and died here and is buried here and decided to spend the rest of eternity in the Civil War for it. So it's a really nice day out. Today's the 3rd of March 2022. It's about 55 degrees. I don't know if you can hear, there's some birds chirping, but you can also hear the hum of 395, which is a highway, goes through Alexandria and Arlington, connects into Washington, D.C. It's amazing how some of the things around here have changed so much and some have not changed at all. This park has not changed since I've been here last. Just about everything is the same, which is nice in the day where just everybody's willing to knock something down to put up something slightly more convenient. I guess that's life, you know, you gotta keep moving, but at the same time, is it still the same place? Can you really call it the same place if it's just changed so much? Anyway, I'll turn the camera off because there are kids here and they might think I'm a bit of a prevert. So as you can see here, there's a rifle trench. The writing's kind of messed up, so I'll read it. This rifle trench extended from the north bastion towards Battery Garage, located beyond Leesburg Pike, Route 7. Another rifle trench extended from the tip of the south bastion near the fort gates, which is off to the left here. The rifle trenches prevented many enemy forts from moving towards the rear of the fort. So you see it's maybe a ravine type thing. I'm sure it's all grown in. But obviously, they trip up enemy soldiers. You gotta do it. I remember in the Iliad, they used to put planks down and walk across them. Anyway, so I was reading a plaque over there. I wasn't filming because of the kids, but you think this is kind of a wooded area, and it is, obviously not super thickly, but these trees are relatively new. The ones over there are a bit younger. They're only about 20 or 30 years old. While these here, I'm no tree expert, but they kept this pretty bare so they could see if anybody was coming. Here's that trench that we saw here. Obviously, you're a fortress. You want to keep everything as visible as possible so you're not caught by surprise. Although with that giant building over there, it's no longer defendable, I don't think. But it must be pretty cool to live over there. It's a great place to stretch your legs. There's a fellow running over there. There's a ton of dogs being walked. It's a good place, right in the middle of a city. Alexandria's got about, I don't know, 250,000 people, give or take. Arlington over there, in that direction's got about 250,000 people. So a place like this, you just couldn't build today. The land's too valuable. You could put several buildings like that up in here. So you might be talking on the order of several $100 million worth of real estate now turned into a park. It's hard to imagine that ever happening today, but you know, still it's a nice place to have picnics. There's a little gazebo over there. There's probably about 5 or 6 of them around here. And there's a Van Dorn Street right there. You see that car go by, going over to King Street. I also saw another plaque, again near the children, so I didn't film it. But essentially, it said that the black church where we saw the cemetery is actually over near King Street in that direction, intersecting with Braddock Road. It's still there. I just didn't know the name of it. So it's nice to see some continuity in a time where everything is just changing and changing and changing. That some things we can point back and, I don't know if I'll be talking about this to my grandkids, but if they ever come here and they're like, yeah, it's pretty much the same. Right. So here's an interesting little plaque here. Basically shows you the gun battery and the trajectory it will follow. So this outlying 6 gun battery was constructed to cover the ravine where Interstate 395, see those cars, that's the ravine, is today. The remains of a covered way rifle trench that extended from the northwest bastion is visible near the Park Road. This trench provided protection for troops moving from the fort to support the outlying gun battery. So this is the bastion right there, and we'll get to that in a minute. So I'm sitting here at a pavilion, this little amphitheater here. I've got little sound rigging booths or light rigging booths. I'm no expert, but I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about this park. Ordinarily, I don't really like people, the threat of sending someone to jail so the government can pay for a park. It doesn't seem really essential to government. I'll go down a little bit further. But it is nice that it's here, and I do like parks because for somebody who needs to get out of the house quite often in order to stay somewhat sane, this is not a bad place to do it. Now, granted, I don't live around here. I've been spending a decent amount of time in Northern Virginia. I used to live around here, and as a teenager, I think I'd been here once on a school trip just to expose us to a bit of history. No battles actually took place anywhere near here. Actually, Battle of Manassas, which is probably about half an hour, 45 minutes south of here, there were 2 battles there. And they were pretty nasty battles, so. But this place never saw any action. And it was all part of a ring of fortresses around Washington, D.C. in order to keep it safe from invasion. And it more or less did the trick. I mean, part of what you see in these places is not so much a place to defend, but also to ward off any invasion. There's a place in the south of France called Aigues-Mortes, which just means sort of dead water in medieval French, and it's a completely fortified town on the swamps of just outside of Marseille, probably about 45 minutes outside, maybe an hour. And it was never used. Nobody ever went anywhere close to it. You could say, well, what a waste of money. You might be right. But also, the place was impregnable. So this was built in the 1300s, 1200s. And nobody wanted to touch it. So it's kind of, if you want peace, prepare for war. And sometimes you need a place like this just to keep the peace. But with that said, I mean, it's a nice place to, you know, that they've converted it into something that it's a historical, you know, they do have a museum here. Unfortunately, it's closed today, but they have little bits, little soldier stuff that you can see online. But perhaps I'll do a second video on that. But I'm also a little bit camera shy in the sense that I don't really like knowing that people watching me filming. I might look like a weirdo or some kind of person who does these sorts of things, you know. So, well, I'll just carry on talking about what you see here. So here's another cemetery. Probably about 30 years after the war, this area was bought for $300. 15. Sorry, I can't read today. 11.5 acres around here. $300. Man. So these people are from Fauquier County. There they are. It's a black family. And they lived here for 40 years. Fauquier County is probably about an hour and a half south of here. So moving in closer to the city. And it looks like Alexandria, the city where we are, bought this land in 1956 and turned it into a park. So in this area there were this Jackson family. Kind of roped off, as you can see here, so we don't disturb these souls here. It was quite interesting, you know, that you're buried next to a Civil War fortress. I guess we're going to go up to the walls there and take a look around. They've got some cannons. So as you see, that there's a historic area, no games, no picnics, no sunbathing. No historical games either, I suppose. Like the old wheel hitting the wheel that can make it keep going. Like a hoop, that's what they would call it. So this is the Fort Ward Bastion. This is probably from like down here to up there is probably about 20 feet, 15, 20 feet. It's a nice little hill. And as you see around here, there's a whole ring of fortresses surrounding Washington, D.C. This is the main area of Washington, D.C., especially during the Civil War. And you see all these black dots right there. Those are actually still around, something like this, but that's nice. So here we are, we're entering into the fort. As you can see, there's little built-up things around here. There's a gate over there. And we'll just keep walking around. There's somebody filming over there. A fellow filmmaker. I guess that's what I am now. Filming all the dumb stuff I do. Now this looks like a well. There's nothing really marking it. But it has all the signs of a well. Covered actually. The rope there. Obviously if you have a fortress, you want to keep it, you're going to need water. Got tons of hardtackle that's still available today. But here's these bomb proofs. It's this right here. You see this? If you go down to that ravine, they're probably about 10 feet high. They're 12 feet wide, and they go about 200 feet long. And there's the other one over there. So these are there to, as you can see here, they're meeting rooms, storage facilities, sometimes kept as a prison. In the event of attack, the structures provided temporary protection for soldiers. Water was supplied by the well. There it is. That's one thing I got right. The water was supplied between the two bomb proofs. The roof of the bomb proof. A little poet on our hands here. Constructed from logs that projected 3 feet over the entrance. The structure forming a bunquette. So you can see that this is sort of a It's almost like a dugout in baseball. In which infantrymen could stand to fire their musket if the fortress walls were scaled by an attacker. So it says to go this way, so we'll go that way. Alright, so this is the northwest bastion here. So there are about 4 different places like this. This is the only one sort of maintained as it would look back in the Civil War. As you see, got a pretty big cannon here. I'm so close to it, but if you can see, it's about that wide. I don't know, I'd say 4.5, 5 inches wide. Now, these things could go probably about 1.5 miles over that way. You'd have to hit your azimuth just right to get it, but as you see down here, good luck trying to get in there. You can stand up here and just pick soldiers off if they come in here. Seems like a pretty silly thing to do, just to grab a few cannons, but needs must. As you see, they have different styles of cannon. There's probably about 3 of these big ones, 1 medium-sized one and 2 smaller ones. Pretty nice looking things. Now you see this bottom part here would be hitched to a wagon, or hitched to horses, and they would drag it backwards. You'd probably need a team of about 3 or 4, 2 or 4. Yeah, they're usually doubled up. Obviously these wheels are not even rails. They're not made of, they're made of some sort of metal, probably steel. But this bad boy can pack a punch. It usually took about 4 or 5 people. You'd have the commander, somebody to load it, somebody to pull off the top. They'd pull it out and launch that mother as far as it could go. You see here, this is a smaller one, nice and green, so it probably has a bit of copper in it. Let's see how, if you see the mouth there, it's about that big, about the same size to be honest with you, but obviously with a shorter barrel, it's probably not going to go as far, but it might pack just as much of a wallop. And it probably weighs about half the weight of the other one. And it's more or less the same as the others. So if you wanted to, you could just start popping off over, if Alexandria decided to declare war on Arlington, well, they'd probably have to go that way, but just say they decided to declare war on Falls Church, they'd have a head start. And as you see down here, there's this sort of dry moat going on here. It does get a bit rainy during the summer. I would hate to be trying to take this place in the summertime. And it does get hot as hell here, mostly from the humidity. Imagine these things get really hot, and you can fire maybe 2 or 3 of them a minute. Depends on how good you are, how cooperative your camp is. But it's going to get really hot. Even these small guys heat up really good. And they aren't really into health and safety, so they just fire them out as much as you can without damaging them. And we'll deal with the consequences of that later. As you see, these trees were not there. It really would screw with your vision. So imagine you don't see any trees there. And you'd be a Civil War soldier. So here's a magazine. I have seen this open. Remember when we did, there's a filling room over there. This is magazine 3. Powder magazine and filling room. Ammunition. I'll read this in case you can't see. Ammunition from forts, guns was kept in underground storage facilities called magazines and filling rooms. Shells were armed and sometimes stored in the filling room, while the magazine was used to hold black powder and graded rounds. Implements for firing the cannons would also be kept in the filling room. Duty in either filling room or the magazine was hazardous, as the slightest spark would ignite the highly explosive black powder. A lot of movies have that as a plot point. Soldiers assigned to this task were required to remove all metal from their persons to wear protective coverings on their shoes. Don't light a match if you go near this. They actually do keep this. It's a shame that you can't see it, but then again, I imagine all kinds of critters would crawl in there. So as you see, this is the bastion here that we just saw earlier. There's a cannon without a cannonless cannon. So here's the sign. Northwest Bastion. The plan of Fort Ward consists of 5 bastions with positions for 36 guns. Now, this one we saw 6. So this is where we were just now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's the magazine. It's the filling room. Northwest Bastion illustrates how the entire stronghold appeared in 1864. This bastion is armed with 6 reproduction weapons based on Fort Ward's original table of armament. 3 4.5, oh, that's not bad. Half an inch off. Rodman rifled guns. Number 14. 14, 16, 7. There's 16, not 17. I think 14 was over in that direction. Two 24-pounder smooth bore howitzers. It's 13 and 15. That's 15 right there. That's kind of a smaller one. And 1 6-pounder James rifle. The cannons worked in concert to sweep the field towards Little River Turnpike, which is that direction. Where was I? And Leesburg Turnpike, which is over in that direction. To the north. Artillery crews in teams of 5 to 7 men, not bad, were assigned to each gun position. Infantrymen were stationed along each ledge. Okay, that's it right there. Just there. There's another one. Between the gun platforms. Rifle trench extended from the point of this bastion to an outlying gun battery. This was restored in 1961 to 1964. Let's see, here you have it. So basically you have this here. They drag it up here. You get a guy, he's pretty much running the show. This guy takes it in. He's holding his dick. I don't know. This guy lights it and this guy will yank the chain and it'll blast it off. So ready? They basically have to get the angle right, and then away she goes. And so here we go. 4.5. Those big boys, they powder charge is 3.25 pounds of powder. Projectile itself weighed 25-30 pounds, and it so the tube, right? The cannon itself is nearly 5 tons, and the range is 1.7 miles, 7.5 miles. So that's a good little ways. And the smaller ones could go 3/4 of a mile, and the sort of medium one would go a mile. So if you see this, is pretty much around here would be the same thing. It's just not restored. And there would be another one down there, and another one over there. And so you probably only had a couple, maybe 3 or 4 acres within here. You could probably put a couple hundred men comfortably. And obviously there wouldn't be any trees here. The bobcats have all been grown over by these guys. Still, it's nice. See a little bit of green. When you live in South Philadelphia, you don't see any green at all. It's nice just to be walking around on the grass. All right. Alright, so here's a little mock-up of the gate. That's what that's called. Now if you see this thing right here, it looks like a little castle. That's what it is. That's supposed to represent the Army Corps of Engineers who built this. And this is not the original thing, but as you see, it kind of had to be able to stop people from coming and going. Because unlike, let's say, if you were in Britain, you could stop the foreigners from coming in. You would recognize them because they spoke in foreign. Any French and Spanish or Dutch people, they would come in, and obviously they'd be pretty easy to spot because the moment they started speaking, they would be foreign. But there wasn't a lot of difference between the Americans. That's one of the sad things about the Civil War, is that all the casualties are on essentially the same team, the same country, and so you gotta be careful. You don't want your side to be caught. It's a nice looking gate. Don't know how practical it was, but obviously you gotta keep an eye on all your munitions and stuff. Alright, we've arrived at the officer's hut. So I'll read this, it's a little bit scratched up from the years it's been out here. The officer's hut, just put them there. The officer's huts, soldiers' barracks, and mess halls were located outside the fort near the present museum. These structures were built in a typical Morton batten style. The above photograph, so that one right there, a bunch of guys hanging outside of that. It's taken at Fort Ward in 1863 and shows the quarters of Captain Theodore H. Rockwood. He's the guy sitting down here. Of the Company E, 1st Connecticut Heavy Artillery. Throughout the war, Fort Ward was manned by companies of the 1st Connecticut Heavy Artillery, as well as manned by units from New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. The fort could accommodate a garrison of approximately 1,200 soldiers, although records indicate only 300 to 400 men were stationed here at any one time. So, here's the guy, he's holding the fort, or responsible for it. Unfortunately, this is closed today. I know it says that it's open, but it is not. Trust me. It's a nice little house. It's a tiny museum, but it's got all kinds of cool stuff, like records and uniforms, and they have a hardtack, which is still edible to this day. You know, you think about food being so, perishable, but they made this to last forever. So far, so good. Here's an interesting little bit that might answer some questions about the Civil War. A lot of African Americans, so a lot of them, it says 90% had been enslaved at the start of the war. Due to all the federal soldiers based here, so this is a federal fort, as in the Union side, the North, held in enemy territory, so you didn't necessarily trust the people who lived around here, but just kept an eye on things. Something like 10,000 Virginian blacks joined the war. Some of them are it says like half of them were under the age of 12. Some of them are hospital attendants, grave diggers, stevedores, teamsters, cooks, laundresses, labor gangs to build the roads and construct these places. More than 200,000 men enlisted the USCT, United States Colored Troops. It was held here as well as over in the seminary, which is about a mile down the road. So you have pictures of soldiers obviously wanting to do their bit. I'll just go over the road here. It's another one. So this is sort of post-Civil War people in this neighborhood, so over there mostly. got involved with civil rights. A lot of them were based out of churches. Obviously, you want to make the moral case that for democratic rights. So anyway, I just thought it'd be interesting to do this as a little experiment. Walking around here, it's a nice place. A lot of people walking their dogs or sort of getting their exercise in. A lot of seniors out there. I mean, imagine it's Thursday around 12:30 or 11, probably 1 by now. There's a guy running over there. A few maintenance people. But it's a nice place to go for a walk if you have a dog, if you have a kid. Yeah, just let them go nuts here. But it's nice to have a little bit of history in a place that you just can't plan for a thing like this. You see this, it's interesting because immediately as I'm walking around here, I'm just going in circles, just talking, as I'm wont to do. It's pretty interesting to know that the difference between the way the English would do this. It does have a lot of the hallmarks of something like from the English Heritage or the National Trust, but this is just a community place. You wouldn't go out of your way to come here unless you were a real Civil War nut. I'm sure they're out there. But the English have this way of turning I guess, I mean, there's not a whole hell of a lot here, but it's an interesting little nugget of history. Didn't see any action, but they would turn it into some almost ridiculous thing. I'm sure there's a gift shop in there, in that museum. But there's something really quaint and small town about this that I like, because most people don't know the history of this place, and you just learned it, at least a bit of it. And it just seems like the English are very, I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but the English are very, how would you put it? It was, well, I gotta say, I wouldn't say the English. I'd say the English middle class would just eat this shit up on a spoon. Then usually not very impressed with American history, but it's funny that if you look at the history of military history, a lot of Europeans were watching this war and wondering, they're testing out trench warfare here, new styles of cannons. Some of the naval battles were done with ironclad ships. That's basically the birth of using mostly metal in ships, and then you get things like, metal ships of the line, dreadnoughts into your, I guess your modern Aegis cruisers. I think it's a cruiser. Maybe I should learn more about that before I start talking about it. But, the normal, I would say modern warfare. So this does have a lot of military implications. I mean, if you saw that there's a lot of actually classical military things, just the layout of the fort looked very medieval. And I saw places like that in France and England. Obviously, this is at a much smaller scale, but they had a ring of forts all the way around the capital city. That's not something you saw in England. And it's, it was an idea that you didn't need a giant fort, you need lots of little ones. If you had a communication system set up between them, you could get word over to Maryland, and not too long of a time that the Southerners are coming. Perhaps I'll stay away from the street. But anyway, just back to the park. It's nothing fancy, but I'm so glad that something like this exists. And so often in history, you're so disconnected with the land, being in a place, imagining yourself as a soldier. Obviously, it might be different for women, because you'd have to imagine yourself as a man, but you'd have to sure that there were women around here somewhere doing something. But this was reality back 160 years ago. The chances are, if you were a healthy man, you were in a place like this. As you saw, that people came here from Ohio, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. Obviously, my mom's family wasn't even in this country at the time of the Civil War. Most of them weren't. But my dad's family were. Well, that was in West Virginia, and West Virginia has a unique history that Virginia seceded from the Union, so they were part of the South. But the place, the counties that became West Virginia didn't even want to leave the South. Most of them didn't own slaves. Most of them had never seen a black person in their lives, and didn't want any part of it. They just wanted the peaceful life. And they've got Confederate soldiers traipsing over their land. There's an interesting story that my father told me about an ancestor of ours. I forget his last name. It's not my last name. It's I guess, another branch of the family. But his name was Thomas Jefferson. A lot of people named their kids after famous presidents. Anyway, he was a preacher. I'm not really sure. I'm not too up on the different terms and what they mean. But he was it's called a religious pastor. Pastor is usually a sort of catch-all term for someone who runs a church and blesses the bread and the wine. And he was owed a debt by some man, and the man couldn't pay the debt. And he, that's interesting, since it's a religious man, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Actually, in a more Protestant term, which I only learned by going to, I think it was a Presbyterian church, that they have changed the trespassers parts into debts. Who knows why? But the guy couldn't pay his debt, and in the Virginia law, you could pay your debt by either giving up land or giving up slaves or property. You could give him a cow or a sheep or something. And this guy decided he was going to pay in the legal tender of a human being, which is crazy by today's standards, but that was a different world. I'm not saying it was bad or good. It was bad. It was definitely bad. But that's the world they lived in. There are bad things today that we just have to learn to live with and maybe improve along the way. So he was given a slave. And, being a priest, you're a fairly religious man. And, some people felt justified in owning slaves because the Jews were slaves, according to the Bible. And yet, God allowed that to happen. However, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather didn't see that way. He thought it was wrong. And so he owned a slave for about a week, enough to, because there was a formal process of manumission. Manumission is essentially, you had to give somebody their walking papers. It's like your pink slip. You're getting fired from being a slave. And you had to give the person a legal document saying that they were free. And, there was a, you know, it's not just like running down to the DMV. You had to get things stamped, and you had to go to this place and that place, and you didn't just hop in your Ferrari and hit the road. It took a little bit of time. Most of these people did not work full time, so he owned the slave for about a week or so. He just, you know, grumbled that he'd, you know, what a way to pay a debt is to give somebody a slave, because you're basically dumping a moral dilemma on somebody, paying your debt in the form of a human person. You know, today's standard, there's so many levels of wrong in that it's amazing. But you know, it's something that we can be proud of. I think our family can be very proud of that a guy, you know, if you want to chase a debt enough that you hound a guy and he pays you, obviously you need the money, right? You don't go chasing debts unless you want the money. And you get paid in something that's so morally repugnant to you that you end up just saying, I'm going to take the loss on this one because this is disgusting. So I think in a country that has a lot of sort of stains on its reputation, there are good men. And I'm quite proud that this country had the wherewithal to produce men like my great-great-great-great-grandfather, whatever he was. And it's something you can look towards and say, yeah, that was a good guy. And you know, and you don't have to look any further than your own family to find sources of courage or, you know, moral strength, or that you're willing to sacrifice your financial well-being for the sake of something that's morally correct. So anyway, that's about all. I'm going to head home. It just dropped about 5 degrees in the last 10 minutes. And as you see, I only have this little hooded sweatshirt. But, you know, a place like this is really interesting. I'm not suggesting that you go out of your way to come here. But if you see a place like this, you've got a couple hours just to mill around, I would check it out. And that goes the same for anywhere. This place was someone's life for a couple of years, you know. And as we see over there in that graveyard down at the bottom of the hill, that's where they're spending all of eternity, or at least their bodies. And you know, it's not something silly like the world's biggest ball of yarn. This was proper American history. A lot of the reintegration, or just plain integration, of blacks into American society happened right here. This is where they went from being sort of the lowest of the low slaves to being somebody, you know. And that's, I think, most of the slaves, all they wanted to do was just have a fair shake at things, and this is where it happened. So before I say anything stupid or anything else stupid, I'm going to just sign up. So see you soon.